This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, we continue our analysis of Season 5 of The Chosen with a discussion of the third episode, Woes.
Yeah. You know, we were chatting before we hit record here, Brent, about I've now spent 2 episodes throwing shade at how they've used the Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. And you went and just noticed how in the Gospels that phrase is not only slightly different in different instances, it shows up in kind of different places. And so I think there would be room for a rebuttal of like, well, we're lacking some level of clarity. We have the ability to put it here as they've put it. I have always associated this concept of Jesus weeping over Jerusalem with the triumphal entry because it's such a, I think you said it was Matthew that does that almost while he's writing in.
It's Luke 19.
Luke 19 is where he's riding into the temple and weeps over Jerusalem.
Yeah. Now they portrayed this. He gets on the donkey. Yeah, it's even mixed up the way they're portraying it. So they bring it to Jesus. They put their cloaks on the donkey. Jesus sits on it, starts riding. Then people are spreading their cloaks on the road. As he's drawing near, the disciples begin to rejoice. We see all that. People are shouting. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." So, they had those guys come out before he gets to the crowd. So we're already mixing things around there.
Yep.
And then Luke goes on to say, "And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, blah, blah, blah." Like he's going to actually say that in this episode. They don't have that in the other Gospels in the entry. So
yeah, I have always associated that with the triumphal entry because of the impact it has on the triumphal entry. If you don't associate Jesus' weeping as a reaction to the triumphal entry, then what you get is rock and roll music, Jesus smiling, look at the triumph. If Jesus is weeping, it tells us the people didn't understand, and this triumphal entry is not what Jesus, like he was trying to communicate something and everybody was missing it. So much so he breaks down and weeps over it. So I think they would look at the record and say there's plenty of room to do what they've done in portraying it the way they have. For me, that's always been important of keeping those two things together. So I wanted to be more fair about the shade that I had thrown now 2 episodes in a row, and it's not going to get any better. I think they have a case that they could make. I just don't like it. But I wanted to acknowledge that, like, okay, when you look at those gospel records, there's enough room you could certainly put the pieces together the way that they have. For me, it's important to tie those 2 things together for those reasons, but I digress.
yeah, anyway, I've just been going crazy looking through these Gospels, trying to make sense of all this. And
yeah. And like I said in the last episode, generally speaking, they're pulling apart all these stories. You got the 7 woes in Matthew 23.
yeah,
Like they're moving these pieces around in the final week, and they're not trying, which probably serves them very, very well. And I'm probably in enough historical criticism scholarship that I actually, not only do I not mind it, I'm like, yeah, actually, let's be a little bit fluid here just to loosen this thing up a little bit. And you know how I have a disdain for harmonizing all the Gospels.
well,
So
yeah.
I haven't had a problem with those. A couple things here and there that I would frame differently, but I have kind of enjoyed. I think I've been avoiding that word, but I think I've enjoyed the way they have kind of seamed and sewed different pieces together. And it works for me.
Yeah, and it's absolutely a challenge. I did actually crack open my Harmony of the Gospels as I was trying to sort this out for the first time in years. I've had it sitting on my shelf for a few months since I found it, but I actually got it out. And it's just bonkers in this section.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, there's 4 tiny columns. The lengths that you have to go to get this stuff to line up in some sort of quote unquote perfect way. Like it isn't meant to be like that.
No.
And so what are you going to do when you're telling the chosen, the story of Jesus? You're using all the Gospels. And we'll see in this episode how they're taking specific details from each Gospel and putting them into a single scene. You got to be loose with it because there's no making sense of it because they're just not meant to be that way. If they were doing a show that was specifically Matthew or specifically Luke,
sure,
then it's like, okay, well, you're kind of bound to it at this point. But they're not doing that, and whatever. The Gospels aren't making it easy on us. The Chosen isn't making it easy on me. It's just the way it goes.
Yep. And like, I like what you just said. It's not, of all the things it's supposed to make sense of, the historical harmony is not what it's trying to make sense of in our gospel. So well said. I think it's probably a good spot for the spoiler horn, huh?
Let's do it. So we're at the Passover table again. This time we're doing John 14. And Jesus is talking about how he's going somewhere they can't go. The disciples are troubled and confused by this. I'm like trying to get into their mindset as I'm watching this scene. Like, okay, like I've read this passage who knows how many times over my life. I know what's happening. I know where the whole story is going. They don't know. So I'm trying to get into their mindset as it's like, yeah, okay, I can see that. Jesus says he's going to send the Holy Spirit. He specifically says Holy Spirit. And the disciples are like, another person? So I'm like, would they have thought that's what Jesus meant when he said that? Like not knowing what we know today? Is that what they would have thought? So I don't know. And then we get the John 13 version of Peter's denial. The specific language that they use is John 13 anyway. There might be details from other parts too, but
yeah, this is where I feel like the next episode, maybe even two, I think this is as far as I've watched so far, the angst and the anxiety are actually growing as we're going backwards because Jesus is going to comfort them. So that makes sense. But every subsequent episode, I'm trying to like, I think one of the things they've really done well in the Seder meal scenes is attempted to portray the kind of confusing, what in the heck are we talking about? What's going on? Like total disorientation. Some disciples are getting it. Some aren't. I've really, really enjoyed that. I purposely put down a note about Philip. We've talked about Philip more than once on the podcast. Those of you that have been with me in Turkey had a special lesson thinking about the life of Philip. Whenever I see Philip in the Chosen story, I'm always like, oh, Philip, oh. And so to watch Philip's trying to understand. Like he's like trying to understand. And just thinking about his real life backstory of where his story goes. Just so good. But yeah, I didn't have a whole bunch of other. I loved the spot where Jesus is sensing, like he senses all the angst, all their struggle. And he says, I'm giving you peace. Peace I give you. Which doesn't necessarily land for the disciples the way he probably wishes it did. But I begin to relate to this room a little bit more.
Yep. And then we get into the credits. Coming out of there, we have Jesus standing in front of Caiaphas and a bunch of others. And Atticus is like, hey, let's settle down. Let's let him speak. Let's let him say whatever he's going to say. Jesus goes into a little bit. Z quotes Psalm 69, the zeal for your house shall consume me. And this is bringing in the John 2 version of the cleansing of the temple. Because it says the disciples, John 2 says the disciples. They specifically give it to Z, which makes sense, I think. But
yep, totally.
Brings that in. So, of course, we have Matthew 21, Mark 11, Luke 19, all at play here. The den of robbers comment. And actually, I was looking, I made a note of this. I wanted to look into this further, and I kind of forgot. I mean, I was seriously just neck deep in all of these different passages trying to look at all these details. But I noticed that specifically Matthew 21, he seems to be speaking to the merchants. He overturns their tables and then says the den of robbers thing to them. Whereas here they're portraying it, addressing to the religious leaders. And I didn't look at the other gospels to see where that lines up. But
yeah, I definitely noticed that and made some notes about that. I wouldn't disagree with it. Historically, I think he probably said it to the merchants, but the greater, like the thing behind the thing behind the thing is what the Mishnah called the booths of Ananus, of Annas. And like they're definitely behind this whole outfit. And so to direct it, theatrically to direct that at the leaders, I thought was kind of a nice touch.
Yeah. But then there's comments about destroying the temple and raising it again in 3 days. They're questioning his authority a little bit. More to come on that later, of course, but they are starting to ask those questions. And Jesus kind of stomps off and says, I don't even recognize this place. And people start to shout Hosanna and blah, blah, blah.
I have a line in my notes I can't read, Brent. I think it was probably Jesus that says no more.
He says no more selling stuff or something like that. I didn't write it down, but I did see that it comes from the Mark 11 version of the story, where it says he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple.
No more shortcuts. No more.
Oh, no more. Yeah.
I can't read my own writing, Brent. This is horrible.
Uh-oh.
Because I have it's all blocked out. Like, I loved this line, but I can't remember. I can't read what the line was. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Or somebody will write me and let me know what it was.
There you go. Yeah, I feel like I need to, I've shot myself in the foot. I've seen the whole season, and then we've talked about, 2 episodes so far, but I've rewatched several of the episodes. So I'm getting everything mixed up in my head anyway. But I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So then inside, Shmuel calls for a scribe. Like, we got to write this down. Everyone's arguing. Shmuel makes a comment, and they're like, oh, that's not even what he said, so maybe we should get a scribe. Shmuel makes the reference to Jeremiah. Yusuf ultimately kind of brings the conversation around and says, like, well, look, here's the deal. Whatever is happening here, the people are finding hope in Jesus that they aren't finding elsewhere. And Shmuel's, pretty offended by that. But then Yanni kind of settles the whole thing, and he's like, look, Jesus is not going to lie. So we just need to ask him the right questions in front of the right people, and then we can achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Yep, absolutely.
And then we see Kaufney work in the background a little bit, talking to a merchant. He's like, yeah, so you lost this, and that's like this. And he's like, well, it's not that much, but it's still a lot. And so Kaufney's he's being real gentle. He's not being like, you should be upset about, like, he's just cold and calculating in this moment.
Yep. He is definitely working the scheme of building an anti-movement.
Yes.
Which, when I saw this, and I'm still not far enough in, I don't know what's going to happen. So I haven't watched far enough to know. As he's doing this in this episode in particular, I was like, oh, are they going to use Kaufney and others like him to stir up the crowd that's going to be shouting crucify? One of my big beefs is that we're always like, the common Christian phrase of like, the same crowd that shouted Hosanna was the crowd that shouted crucify. And I've been like really adamant, like, no, it was not the same crowd. The Jewish crowd shouted Hosanna, and they may have been misguided, and they may have misunderstood a host of things. But the crowd that's shouting crucify is a crowd worked up on behalf of the chief priests and this corrupt mob. And it is a completely different group of people that is completely corrupt. It is not the Jewish voice. It is a corrupt voice. And I'm like, at this point, I'm like, man, are they going to have a Jewish crowd? These are the moments that I kind of just look for, because it's what my antenna are up. I'm super hypersensitive to it. Like, is this going to be an anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic supersessionist thing? But there are these other moments too. And in a couple episodes to come, there's going to be the other moments where I'm like, I don't know how they're going to do this. How are they using Rome? How are they using the high priest and the priesthood? How are they using Kaufney? I'm not sure how they're going to pull all this together yet. So jury's still out for me. I don't know how it's coming together.
Well, and even in this episode later on, Kaufney kind of leads this chant of no Messiah. He's trying he's partnering with Rome, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And they portray that as a very small part of the crowd. And then the larger crowd is shouting Hosanna. So,
which I appreciated, because I was like, yeah, I mean, you can't oversimplify this. This didn't fit into perfect categories. There certainly would have been people who didn't love Jesus. So at that point in the episode, I was like, yeah, okay. I need to not try to resist the fact that this was complex and nuanced, and it didn't all fit one or the other. So well said.
So then Judas is asking Jesus about the no sacrifices in the temple thing. He's like, well, how are they going to do their thing? And Jesus is like, I need to just be alone for a little while. As he's concerned about that, Jesus is definitely not concerned about that. Kind of gives him a little stern comment there. And Peter's like, look, let's just all go inside. And Z tries to go with Jesus anyway. And they kind of convince him. And Big James says, we're going to need each other more than ever now. And John is kind of asking, like, hey, who's known him the longest? Where's all this stuff coming from? Thaddeus is like, well, I saw him arm wrestle somebody one time.
Yeah, totally.
It's like, oh, yeah, that explains it.
Yeah.
And then Matthew is like, I want to be clear that he didn't strike anybody. He didn't strike any animal. Like, he didn't actually hurt anybody. And Judas is still concerned about the sacrificial system. He's like, he's assaulting our entire system of worship. And then Philip is like, he's assaulting the wrong version of the system. Like, the worship is good, but the system has become corrupted, and that's what he's taking out.
Yeah, I'm starting to see at this episode, I'm starting to see some of Judas's, how they're framing Judas to start to take shape. Judas is trying to like work through what I would call like an attack on what he perceives to be patriotism, national identity, all that kind of stuff. At the same time, Judas's argument in his mind, his own justification, is an argument about unity, but it's not true unity. It's that he wants Jesus to be super clear about stuff in a way that draws all Jews together. Like he'll frame, I'm not saying he's right. He will frame his argument within the chosen scenes. Like, I just want you to solidify our common Jewish identity, bring us together as a nation, unify us. He's going to say that multiple times. And this is where you start to see that argument with some sense of clarity in Judas, which plenty of reflection points, by the way, for just the world that we live in. That's all I'll say about that. But I mean, plenty of moments of like, boy, some of these same impulses live alive and well today. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was curious about Matthew's comment about like, hey, let's make sure we understand he didn't actually hurt anybody, because I don't see that in the cleansing version of Matthew. So I'm not sure why they had, I mean, maybe they just had him do it for whatever reason.
It fits his attention to detail, is the way that I would say. He's like, he's the guy that wants to make sure you're not overstating the case or over-exaggerating or over-narrating how you're seeing something. He's wanting to say like, oh, okay, hold on. Let's make sure we get our details right. He didn't actually, there's that impulse there. And that part fits for me. Maybe not in this gospel, but that part does.
Yeah, it was just the way they portrayed it made it seem like it was like, oh, they got,
sure,
but it's not there. So, and you know, you're seeing that in the religious leader side of things too, where Shmuel is kind of taking some liberties with Jesus' language, and they're like, no, he didn't actually say that.
Yeah.
So, you know, each crowd has their people who are keeping things on track.
Yeah, good point. Each crowd has their reasons for misrepresenting things intentionally or unintentionally. Yeah.
Yeah. So the whole thing kind of descends into an argument there. Mary gets up and leaves. Andrew follows her for a minute. Mary's on her way to get some help. Andrew's kind of questioning her about that, and was like, well, just tell me you're not gonna get hurt or something like that, or you're not gonna get into trouble. And she's like, I don't know. I can't say that. And he's like, okay. But he lets her go. Then we're over with Pilate, who is getting a massage. Atticus and Caiaphas barge in. Caiaphas is like, look, you know, stuff's happening, but this is going to be handled. Don't need your help. Atticus is very concerned about the tax revenues. I'm trying to think what his motivation is. Like, what does he get out of Pilate's success or failure exactly?
Atticus, because I'm thinking about episode, so I can't jump too far ahead as I answer this and respond to this, because it's episode 5 where he's going to make this real clear. But he works for Caesar. He is the hand of Caesar in a way that the governor, he is not a regional leader. He is like Caesar's secret service. So he's got to accomplish Caesar's agenda. And Pilate, and see, up until this morning, literally as we record this morning, I had kind of not loved the way that The Chosen had portrayed Pilate, because he's kind of like this weak, and Pilate's kind of known as being like this bulldog. But actually, I have started to wonder if the team that's helping The Chosen, and I don't know how much they interact with the historical scholarly team when they write this stuff. Who knows? I would love to ask. I'm going to ask next time we get a good interview. I want to get more like clarity on how that relationship works, because they seem to be just super well informed.
Well, from what I understand, Dallas and Ryan and Tyler, they write it all on their own.
Okay.
And once they have like their first, I don't know if it's first draft or like once they have it written, then they give it over to the consultants.
Okay.
The consultants give their feedback, and then they make any adjustments or whatever. That's my understanding of it.
Okay. That's kind of a cool way to do it, especially depending on how much that process goes back and forth. Maybe not multiple times, but I just mean like depending on how much that influences and shapes. Because it feels to me like whoever is consulting and informing is like a big N.T. Wright fan.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're reading the books that I'm reading right now. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. Oh, well, that's what The Chosen did. Oh, wow, okay. That's The Chosen did that. Okay. I'm reading right now Jesus and the Victory of God, which is an older, kind of a pretty staple text for N.T. Wright and his impact on scholarship. But I'd interacted with it as a source, but I hadn't read it from cover to cover. So I'm reading it right now. And I mean, their depiction of Pilate is spot on how N.T. Wright says, Rome put Pilate there to be provocative and bully people. He's a provocative bully, but he was incompetent. I had not heard a scholar I respect articulate the incompetence as clearly as N.T. Wright did. And I was like, oh, well, that's definitely how they're depicting Pilate, as this incompetent. He's kind of provocative. He's kind of this face. He's a bulldog. He's going to make quick decisions and force people in the corners. But it's Rome behind. It's not Pilate's competence. Atticus represents this. Pilate's not going to do anything unless he has to. And Atticus is like, we have to do something, because if this becomes a thing, it will be too late for all of us. So that's how I see Atticus playing that part in the Pilate Caiaphas. And of course, Caiaphas doesn't want Rome's involvement as long as he can keep it. And that's what Pilate would rather have him do. But Atticus is being, and I'm not sure how I love the Roman pressure. I don't think Rome cares. I don't think the Atticus character is necessarily needed historically at all. But I could be wrong about that. And I appreciate how they're using Atticus to play that Roman agenda. You remember seasons ago when they introduced Atticus, I'm like, what is this guy? Like, why is he here?
Yeah.
But it actually has served a really historically astute role in the writing of these seasons, even though I don't think I need that flavor and that shade, and I'm not sure how it will all play out by the time it's done. I totally really like how they've done that. This is a good scene of where it was, I saw that triangulation of Rome and Pilate, who is Rome, but I mean, Caesar's agenda, Pilate's governorship, and the corrupt religious leadership.
Yeah, and I feel like we get a little bit of that flavor of Pilate's incompetence, where he's like, well, I mean, I asked for extra forces and Tiberius didn't send me anything, so, you know, maybe he should suffer some consequences. And
sure,
Atticus is like, what? You think you're going to teach Caesar a lesson? You think that you're going to get away with that? So Caiaphas leaves, and Atticus speaks to him in Hebrew on the way out, and Caiaphas just kind of rolls his eyes at him. But then Atticus turns back to Pilate. He's like, look, dude, you're totally naive. Like, this is going to be a big problem. And Pilate is kind of, he doesn't have the competence to actually deal with it, but he has the competence to know, like, if I do this, then this happens. But if I do this, then this happens. And I'm kind of stuck.
Yep. I appreciated that dynamic.
So then we're back with the disciples. Andrew's trying to get into the mindset of someone who doesn't actually follow Jesus, like trying to understand what the reaction would be to what is happening here. Matthew's taking some notes, it seems like, but he leaves. And then Jesus comes in and tells Matthew that he's getting ready to preach. So they sit down and they're talking about that. And Matthew is reminiscing on the process of working on the Sermon on the Mount. And he's like, I wish we could do that again. And Jesus is like, well, we don't actually have any time to do any more one-on-one work, but you're going to end up teaching this stuff. So pay attention this week. And then the rest of the disciples come in, and Jesus is like, hey, I'm thinking about telling the story of the vineyard. And Andrew and everybody gets really excited. They go grab their props. And I love the little look that Jesus gives Matthew. He kind of turns back like, see, this is good. This is good.
Yeah. First of all, I love the conversation happening with Matthew. Just the personal nature of that. I had been missing some of those things. Number two, this doesn't make me abandon the idea that they have some kind of chiastic. Here we are in season 5 talking about the Sermon on the Mount. And I'm like, golly, this makes me still hang on to this wondering question about whether or not there's any kind of a design there. Nevertheless, I did have this, I wouldn't call it frustration. I was just like, I felt like there was a little bit of a wink and a nod towards all the people that were so mad that Jesus was practicing his sermon. And we talked to Dallas about that. And they have Matthew say, like, you were doing that for me. Almost like you didn't really need to practice. You were practicing so that I could see you and hear you. And I was just like, oh, come on. Stand your ground. Lean into the humanity of Jesus. But anyway,
well, that's coming later. That's coming later.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's very true. But yeah, I really like every time they do a scene of the one-on-one character development, the intimacy between Jesus and his disciples. Could be any disciple, not just Matthew. But Matthew, obviously a highly invested character for this. So I just really enjoy those scenes a lot as a watcher, a spectator.
So then we are in the temple, and Jesus is teaching the parable of the talents, which is Matthew 25. So we're pulling a little out of order as far as Matthew goes for that. But the leaders arrive to question Jesus' authority, and he references John's baptism. They have Zebediah give the answer, and he says, we can't actually say with certainty. And so then Jesus moves into the parable of the tenants, which is the vineyard story that he was talking about. This is also Matthew 25, and then Mark 12 and Luke 20 are the other versions. The disciples are acting it out. Judas is the only one who does not take the acting seriously. He is kind of checked out on whatever is happening here. He has too many other concerns.
Absolutely, he does. Poor guy.
Sorry, I think the parable of the tenants in Matthew might be Matthew 21. I think I might have wrote the wrong thing in one spot. But normally Jesus is just kind of telling the whole story, but he turns and asks Shmuel what the owner would do. And so Shmuel gets into the story with him. I have noted that it is the Matthew 21 version.
Yes.
Where this conversation plays out. And then there's the transition into paying taxes, and Caesar and Yanni is addressing Jesus on this, and Jesus makes him read the full inscription on the coin. So there's this greatly expanded conversation. It's pretty short. Matthew 22, Mark 12, Luke 20. Very short conversation in the Gospels. They expand this quite a bit, which I like. And Jesus makes a comment at one point about the taxes, they have benefits. Among other things, Rome offers their protection to us from foreign invaders. And Matthew gets the reaction shot for this and is like, what?
Yeah.
And I feel like you could have gotten that. You could have got the reaction shot from a lot of people, but
yeah, nice touch.
Yeah, even Matthew was like, that's out of place.
Yeah, sure.
That seems weird. But everyone is, silent, of course, at Jesus' answer, as the Gospels say. And then this is where Coffney comes in with his chant and no Messiah, no Messiah. And then everybody else starts chanting Hosanna. And then, Barnaby kind of breaks through. He's like, hey, you got to finish the story.
Yeah, I did appreciate Barnaby showing up and getting everybody back on track, which doesn't necessarily last for very long, but nevertheless.
Yeah, because then we're back in the circle with everybody, and Shmuel's like, okay, I'm going to ask about this. So he asks about the greatest commandment. This is still Matthew 22. Mark 12, and then from here, Jesus moves into the woes of Matthew 23. Nathaniel kind of says to himself towards the end of this, like, oh my gosh, he's inviting them to kill him. So Nathaniel kind of gets what's going on here.
Yep.
He doesn't necessarily want to say it to anybody else, but he realizes. And Jesus watches them leave, and then he moves into the lament that's at the end of Matthew 23. And I was kind of surprised that the harmony of the Gospels did not try to harmonize that lament with the weeping over Jerusalem of Luke.
Yeah.
But they don't. They keep it separate. So, and I think it is. The language is distinct, but it just seems like they would have tried to smash that together, but they did not.
Yeah, and I thought that was one example where I was like, okay, it actually, what The Chosen has done here actually makes sense to me. Like, not the whole weeping over Jerusalem, that part of the reference, but the whole when they started doing the 7 woes. First of all, we got to the last week and we hadn't done the 7 woes, and I was like so bummed. I'm like, how did they miss the 7 woes? But then they worked it in here, and I was like, what? And then I was like, oh, I kind of looked at it, and I was like, yeah, okay. And yeah, it's surprising the harmony doesn't try to smash it together because of that reference, but it makes sense why The Chosen does put those stories together. So that was a good example of something where I was like, yeah, okay, it makes sense.
So then the disciples take Jesus away. Jesus kind of looks back and he's like, I'm just taking it all in one last time. And then they have their conversation about the destruction of the temple, which is Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. And Jesus tells his disciples that he's done speaking to the crowds. Big James is like, whoa, wait, hold on. And Jesus leaves. So the disciples are arguing about what he means, what the time frame is. Is he done? Is he just done for today? And Philip is like, hey, he said a lot of stuff today. Let's just relax a little bit. We all need some rest. So Philip, is being the voice of reason.
Yeah. Which isn't necessarily the role that he plays, but it didn't feel jarring or make not make sense. So, yeah.
So then we have Jesus sitting on the Mount of Olives, and Big James references Zechariah. Peter's asking about the signs. They sit down. Andrew and John are also there. So Luke 21 puts this whole conversation together about the no stone being left on another stone, and then this conversation about asking for signs and timelines and whatever. Luke 21 just kind of smashes that whole thing together. Matthew 24 is where we're actually getting the words of this conversation, and it does separate this, puts them on the Mount of Olives for this. But it's Mark 13 that specifies specifically James and John, Peter and Andrew out with him. So this is what I'm saying. Like, they're pulling from all the Gospels, even though they're pretty much just using Matthew 24 for the dialogue. They are pulling details from the other Gospels.
Yeah, totally.
So Jesus talks about the false messiahs, the wars, all that stuff, and talks about the timeline. Only the Father knows when this stuff is going to happen. And he's like, hey, I just need to be alone for a little bit. I need to take this all in. So the disciples start to get up to leave. Andrew's like, but we're going to get more clarity on this, right? Like, this isn't the end of the conversation, right? And he doesn't really get an answer from that. And they're like, let's just leave him alone. John kisses Jesus on the head, says that he loves him. Jesus says he loves him as well. Kind of a beautiful moment between Jesus and John there. I like that.
Yeah, it was a super interesting scene to cover some of that content. And I really liked it. Just a whole new way to envision how some of those conversations could have happened and went down. It's not how I've always framed it in my mind's eye. But I loved, again, the personal, the small group, the intimacy, the tired, the sadness, the exhaustion, whatever the thing is that some of the disciples starting to get it. That line, this is the end. Yes, Big James. I thought that was a really, really cool scene. And we're not even to the end of it yet, but because it's got a couple, I think, cool things after this.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Take us into the next little bit.
Yeah. I think I like, just to say one more thing about the John point. I think John is getting it more than some of the others are at this point, but he's not really saying anything about it yet. He's still processing. He's trying to make sure he understands correctly, but he's also just kind of trying to encourage Jesus and be like, hey, no matter what, I'm with you. Even though this is hard, I'm confused. There was another spot earlier with Big James where when James was saying, you're not done preaching to the crowds, right? Like you don't really mean that. And John's like, no, he said that. So John's like trying to assert his understanding a little bit, but he's not overplaying it because he's not actually certain yet. But I think he gets it more than most.
Yeah, I think John, especially as the gospel writer, we're going to know him to be, he's getting it. And like I like how you said that. I kind of picture him maybe as an internal processor. He's getting it, not completely, but probably more than most. I feel like there are parts of this that James gets most clearly in this moment on the hill, and then later in other episodes. Like, James struggled earlier, like you were saying. It's almost like John helps him like come to grips. And then once James is like an external processor. James has always been the action guy for all these seasons. And all of a sudden James is like, all right, this is the end. Jesus is getting ready to die. He's the one that's like, this is it. Jesus is dying. And this is like, you can see him coming to grips with that. He's just the upfront. I'm just going to say it like it is. John's like, okay. You can see him getting it, but he's also like, I don't know if I also get all of it. So I'm going to keep watching.
So then we jump over to Luke 19. This is where the weeping over Jerusalem is put in the show. The words are straight out of Luke 19. And then Jesus looks up and he sees some sheep and he hears some singing. And then he finds David singing Psalm 5. And they make eye contact and smile. And then Jesus looks over to the sheep and he looks back and David is gone. And Jesus looks around with no God goggles anywhere in sight. He's very confused. Where did this guy go? What just happened?
Yeah, It's kind of a Mount of Transfiguration, which now I'm realizing they never had that moment in Chosen. They never did the Mount, which I'm kind of glad because that would have been hard to have done.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm kind of waiting for that in a flashback sort of thing.
Yeah. And absolutely. Because this gave me similar vibes, like Moses, Elijah. Okay, here's David. I thought it was a really interesting connection that's not in the text directly, but a really cool connection to make. And then, I didn't know what to do. I was like, wait, is he hallucinating? Like, is this so much humanity that because we know he's at the end of his physical human capacity. Like, we know that he's going to go to the garden. He's going to get arrested. He's sweating drops of blood. Like, he's at the very end of what a human being can take. So it's not a leap that I'm going to have a hard time making, but there was okay, even Jesus is confused by this. I was trying to think, and there's been a couple other moments in some future episodes of this season too. Like, I'm trying to remember, was there some reference in one of the Gospels at some point where the angels come and minister to him? Is that in the garden?
That's in his temptation.
In his temptation, yeah. I was trying to think if there was one towards the end of his life too, but that's almost how I was like trying to almost envision this or see this. Like, God's helping him make it to the finish line. Like, God's giving him these little moments.
Yeah.
God's ministering to his needs, filling his tank just enough to keep him going.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that direct quote is definitely temptation, the one that I'm thinking of in my mind.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of different language that would make it come up in other spots, but I'm not thinking of anything.
I don't think so either. But at the very least, maybe we envision if God did it in the temptation, why wouldn't he do it throughout Jesus' life and ministry? God does it for you and I. Why not Jesus? Why not like this? Why not now?
Yeah, of course. And then the credits. That is the end of this episode.
That was pretty good. 3 episodes into season 5. I'm starting to be like, it was a rough start for me, season 5. As usual, I'm kind of starting to come around a little bit. I'm like, okay, this is going to be a season that's just full of things little details that I hate and little details that I love and a bunch of stuff in the middle. But I'm just like, okay, I'm all right. This isn't getting worse. It's getting better. I'm coming along. We'll see.
Oh, we'll see.
There's going to be some key moments that are going to be a real make or break for me. So
yeah,
I'm going to be a hard person to satisfy. But for now, I get to say I'm doing okay.
Well, with every successive episode, I seem to be digging more and more into the text. So mission accomplished as far as that goes. I'm always...
Absolutely.
I'm like, why can't they make this easier? But then I'm like, yeah, but I just spent an hour digging through the Gospels. Like,
yep.
What's to complain about? This is great.
Yep.
So we do have I'll throw that NT Wright book in there for the show notes. We got a little bit of extra stuff there for you in your podcast app or at BEHEMOThdiscipleship.com. If you want to get in touch with us, if you have an interesting theory, if there's something we missed, what was that thing at the beginning of the episode that you were saying? You're like, maybe somebody will write in and tell me that. Whatever that was, if you had one of those moments, you can use the contact page at BEHEMOThdiscipleship.com. And I will just say that everything that we do is made possible by listeners like you who support our work. So thank you. And thank you for joining us on the podcast today. We'll talk to you again soon.